Hi, I'm with Sam Duckworth just ahead of tonight's gig at New Slang. Sam's been quite vocal in many ways about political issues recently, and the day after this country has agreed to send airstrikes on Syria, there's a few things that Sam's been particularly vocal about in an online presence, but we wanted to try and put some pieces to camera and just have a sort of little chat about the way the world is right now and the way the UK is and what you can do politically. Sam, if first of all you can just explain why you think airstrikes are wrong.
I think the main reason fundamentally I believe that airstrikes are wrong is because it's what the Syrian people are saying. I think that there hasn't been enough consultation with the Syrians. There hasn't been enough consultation with people that have a direct knowledge of of IS and their practices, and also not enough time was given to debate it properly in Parliament. Speaker of the House opened the debate by saying we requested a 2-day debate. There were 154 MPs that wanted to speak, which would work out to 13 hours to give everybody 5 minutes, which is the recommended time. It was a 9.5-hour debate. I feel like it was absolutely fundamentally rushed through and without any real plan for resolution. And the voice of the Syrian people is saying that if it is going to be military action, it needs to be boots on the ground military action, and that more bombs is just going to play into the hands of the terrorists and the militants.
I think what you say there is really interesting, because I've never seen it as a sort of black and white thing. It's a really kind of difficult decision to make, and I do think that a lot of people who even voted for the airstrikes wrestled with it a lot. So what would you say to the people who are like, well, what are you going to do? Just do nothing kind of things? Your answer is that we should consider all the options more.
I think something that is inevitably going to cause the end of human life, regardless of which side you think, the people that are going to die in the bombings fight for, it has to be given the gravity of understanding that there's a sanctity around human life that has to be considered. I think that is, to me, is fundamental to any discussion when it comes to war, is there's a human cost. And I think where things go from here is difficult, because it's not a commitment to, I was chatting with somebody outside the O'Neills in town. He's like, if we bomb them for a month, it'll keep everyone happy. That's not what's happening. This is going to be long-term, and it's going to have long-term consequences. And the idea that we're all going to happily sit around the table at the end and have a discussion is not going to be the case. I think Stop the War have called an emergency protest on the 12th of December. I think if you fundamentally disagree with the airstrikes, that is, FA Cup final day, you've got to be there. Do you know what I mean? That has to be the moment where, the level of dissatisfaction around the country, be it, the central demonstration in London or the demonstrations happening around the country, that has to be, a time where people are held accountable. Accountable in numbers. People can say, like on the Million Man March, 1 million people disagree with this. I think it will be a time where people have got enough time to plan to turn up. I think not lose all hope and faith in humanity as a whole based on this decision is also something that I didn't feel that it would have to be reiterated. I've only just got back into Facebook in the last few weeks. So really after what was happening in Paris, I couldn't believe the level of, extreme opinions that I was reading across the internet. And then, getting into Facebook, I realised that's the breeding ground for those opinions. And yesterday night, just despair. I think for a lot of people that have been suffering the inequalities that our government have handed out over the last few years, this is the final straw. And I think that there has to be a sense of understanding that this isn't taking your power away. This is indicating where the battle lines are drawn, where actually the nuances of politics, but also, accountability of MPs, proportional represent, every single counter-argument to this to stop this from happening is a factor in regards where to go next.
So you say there this is the final straw. I follow you on Twitter, and we've been friends for probably a decade now. You've always been political. You've always had opinions, and that, it shows in your music and everything you stand for. So I know this is going to be, we've only got so long here to talk about, but this is the final straw. So we spoke about it earlier off camera, but some of the other things which, and I as a local councillor, again, I'm trying to involved in politics in a different way from you, but the idea of fighting for inequalities is something that we both believe in, but you especially so. What is it about this government and changes which are happening right now which you object to first, and then we might talk about how we can do something about it afterwards?
We're the only country in the world under investigation from the UN for human rights abuses in regards to the disabled cuts. That, to me, that is a big indicator of the level of inequality and the level of how badly things have got out of control. It's a human rights issue. There could be a point within the length, with the time frame of this government, where it's considered that the cuts that they've made to disability services is considered human rights abuse. The way that the students are being, racially profiled and controlled and silenced. There's a direct attack on people under the age of 25. I feel like we're living in a world where so many ideas and so many kind of converse arguments are ping-ponging around in an ether that we've suddenly got to a point where everybody's angry and nobody knows how to place it. And I could go on and on and on, the privatisation of the NHS, the way that, for me, somebody who travels around the country by train, the way it's become so much more expensive for me to travel by train than by any other form of transport. Yeah. 1,000 jobs were lost within the green sector. 2 days before the government proclaimed themselves to be the most green government in history. It just goes on and on, sadly.
What I've seen recently, I've recently just been elected as a local councillor here, and I increasingly see that the decisions made about this town in Kingston, and presumably this is the same in other councils, are typically a bunch of the same people making all the decisions for people who aren't reflected, so who aren't represented. Their opinions aren't represented, and be it gender, sex, race, your affluence, or whatever kind of lifestyle you lead. Is that people making decisions on a government or local government level aren't necessarily representative of us, of regular people. So we've been speaking about this, and Tom, who's playing before you today, has been very vocal on Twitter as well. So we need to make sure our voice is heard, and we need to get involved in politics on whatever level. So what can we do? What can we realistically do? What can not everyone can be an MP. What can we do to make our world a more fair world?
I mean, I've got an expression that if I was the person to have tattoos, I'd have it tattooed on me, which is that hope begins at home.
Right.
There has to be, it's a commitment and it's hard work, but there has to be the belief that you have to convey the idea that change is possible from the inside out. It doesn't necessarily mean fundamentally believing in it all the time, but it's about believing in the idea that we're still in a democracy and that we still have power, and that fundamentally the buck does stop with us. I think that what has happened is that the more and more people that have turned up, that the 1 million people that turned up to march against the Iraq war in Whitehall, I think if you could straw poll all of them now, I'd be highly surprised if more than a quarter of them felt politically active. I think it was a real moment where the rug was pulled under the carpet. I think the same thing happened in the student protests. I think a lot of people went, now I'm powerless. And I think first things first, it's about believing in the core principles of democracy, that you're not powerless. That people fought long and hard, and people died for the ability for us to be able to control our own destiny. And I think that apathy is rot, and it sets in throughout community. I think as soon as the consensus in a group of friends is that nothing can be done, nothing gets done. I think it takes one person within that group to be like, what, guys, we can do this. And I think sharing out that burden, if you know somebody that's like, we've got to turn up to this, we got to do this, this is important. If you agree with them, it's about sharing that level of enthusiasm between you. I think that's just just in terms of the preservation of the idea that there's still some power there. There's a lot of misinformation around. I think in regards to, the vote last night, I think it might be the furthest and the most biased that I have seen our mainstream media. The Prime Minister was able to call people that didn't support bombing terrorist sympathisers. It was splashed across the press with no apology. And to me, that is a worrying sign. It's a sign that we're now at the point where, conjecture and slander can be held on the same level as fact. And I think we get all of our information, or a lot of our information, from memes and from infographics, and it's very difficult for us to find out where the truth lies. So people always go, well, I've seen it in the paper, and therefore it's a verified opinion. We have to, there are lots of, real media are a good one. There's lots of independent news sources, and people go, oh, it's conspiracy theory. And that just simply comes from the fact that now a lot of facts seem inconceivable. I think it's about balancing the fact that you might have to carry the burden of always losing. There's an integrity that comes from fighting on the losing side for a long period of time. I think it's hard, it's difficult, but it's essential. And I think that people have a different threshold of how much they can take. And those that are still engaged but are running out of energy, they're the ones that need to be lifted up first. To lean on each other and actually build a network of people that believe that change is possible, and the reaction isn't, we've lost another one, we're screwed again, we've got another, it's difficult, but it's important, because nobody new is going to come to the conversation, and somewhere out there, is the person that finds the way to make everybody else understand that this is the truth and this is important, and that is a resolute commitment.
So if we can get the information from whatever means, one thing that I've seen on a council level particularly is Facebook and Twitter, and putting your opinion on a social media outlet to your friends only goes to your friends. We to make a change, we need to get involved in the political system, or fight against it, but at least interact with it, and not just interact in this kind of little bubble. So what we're saying here is to get involved on council meetings, political meetings. If you actually have a presence, actually get involved with your MP, lobby, be a part of something, turn up to the meetings, make your voice heard. Like, you wouldn't believe that this week there is a council meeting round the corner from where you live, and you can go as a local person and have your voice heard. It's not about just watching videos and sharing videos. You need to be involved.
And 100 people turning up would be considered to be overwhelming.
Absolutely.
That's the thing that I find the most baffling, is that it's difficult, because it requires commitment, and it requires the understanding of knowing when things are happening, and that's hard. That seems to be the hardest thing at the moment, is finding out when things are happening, apart from just before they happen. I think that the sharing process of information has become incredibly difficult, especially for people that would be considered to be ones that have to pay to share information, be it political, be it musicians, or be it, an entity like that. But people, I speak to people in local council that, that we had this one issue and loads of young people turned up, and suddenly everyone went, oh, we should listen. Just the idea that, 100 people turned up and made enough difference to, to actually feel like a young person's voice was valid. It's completely disproportionate, and scarily so.
Absolutely, the numbers you're talking about are right there, and I think that political parties and councils would kill for the social media reach that us and music people particularly have. So what we need to do, what you're saying there, is to use one as a tool, but it's not the end result. The end game isn't by posting your video or your political statement. The end result is to use your statement to engage people, to be active, to do something else. So these things that we need to do, political parties, join political parties, go on marches, be a part of something?
I think that's it. I think the political party one is probably the barrier for entry for most people that would consider themselves to be activists, from actually getting involved in the situation. I mean, I think party politics is important. I think, if there's only one issue you care about, that's important too. You can be somebody that, agrees with the Lib Dems on 90% of things, but on one thing you're completely and utterly in agreement with Labour and in disagreement with that, and that's okay.
I can vouch for that.
It's not football. Do you know what I mean? You don't have to have that, damning loyalty to one side. And I think as people, and also people judge from the top. They look at the leaders, and that's how they make their judgments in terms of local politicians. I think that there is a difficulty of engagement there, and I can completely understand why people wouldn't want to join a political party to get their voice heard. But I think that the upswing of people that joined the Labour Party when Jeremy Corbyn was up for election and then became leader is simply because I think people are not used to having a leader that represents them. I think with the Liberal Democrats, I think that happened with Nick Clegg, and I think that it was a very difficult situation in that maybe history will be able to let people know the amount of stuff that was stopped, or how radical the idea of an AV referendum actually was, and how the turnout was something that didn't necessarily get embraced. I think it needs a top-down reinvention. I really do. I think that activism's got too meta. I feel like I'm 2 days out of the loop within the activist community, and I've lost track of what's going on. It should be simple. Disability cuts to schools, cuts to public services, privatisation of the NHS. All these things should be a cross-conscience decision.
Absolutely.
If you believe in those things, it doesn't matter who is arguing for you. That should be the priority. Yeah, and I think sometimes people want to take ownership of victories to point score. I think if politics on the top was able to unite in the same ideology as politics on a grassroots level, which is justice is more important than who gets the glory, I think the conversation would open up very quickly. And I think groups like the People's Assembly are interesting. They've got, there's their kind of first kind of national conference this weekend, and they've got groups all up and down the country, and they did a very good job protesting the Tory party conference in Manchester, and they have an understanding of the idea that actually unilateral support on certain issues is worth more than being aligned to one organisation.
Yeah.
And having a Labour MP and a Green MP speak back to back on the same issue adds weight to both arguments rather than undermining one or the other.
So it's about being political, and political parties are just a very small fraction of what politics is in 2015. And I guess this is a call for direct action and to be involved and to be a part of something. We've spoken, not on camera, but how much of a moral responsibility do you think that musicians and artists have to raise their voice in the media that they have?
I think the bigger moral responsibility is of the music industry as a whole. I feel that, to be completely honest, I feel like it's so hard to have any kind of opinion, because nowadays everything, everyone's tied to a brand. Everybody's expected to not just represent themselves, but to represent another entity, often the one that's principally funding them. I feel the problem is that a lot of great ideas and a lot of great DIY work and a lot of big label work is getting lost on the idea that there is no political young people. I feel like the representation of the people that are speaking out is as big an issue. I think some artists want to be super politically involved. Some will pick their battles. As long as they're allowed to, when they do decide to do that, they're allowed to have the freedom and the breathing room to do that. I feel like people should be allowed to pick and choose how involved they are. Because politics within something that is, if music is a vehicle of what's inside your head, and 25% of your thoughts are political and 25% of your music is political, that's a ratio that, works with honesty. But the problem is that people want, one person on a guitar standing on a soapbox beating their chest, or 3 people with mohawks. And the problem is that we live in a day and age now where that is not representative of counterculture. Counterculture is taking a stand and seeing it through. I think it's actually got to the point now where there are no identifiable, symbols of what makes somebody rebellious or not. And that should play into our hands. It should be, a call to arms. But I've had more grief in the last 2 weeks, in regards to talking about Syrian airstrikes than I've had in the last 5 years. And all throughout this time, I've been reading that there's no political music, there's no political voices. You could add up, of all the good, active political musicians in the country, you could add up their cross-network reach and it would be 3-4 million minimum. That would make them a very powerful voice in regards to the conversation. But the magazines won't cover them, the blogs won't cover them, because there's too much invested in the idea that uprisings need to look and feel exciting, and Hollywood uprisings, and not just declarations of, a desire for justice and equality. And, to political people out there that want to get involved in this stuff, it's like, stick to your guns, see it through, people have your back. You might feel invisible, but the only reason you feel invisible is because it benefits people for you to feel invisible, because you're not. The bigger you get and the more invisible you feel, the more you're doing right.
Strong words. This is a really hard one to answer, but we're running out of time, and this is the crux of it. So there's a lot of frustrations. We all have this belief that we want to change the world and make it better, but what can we do right now? What can we do this week? If someone's at home watching this video, feeling frustrated with the world and wants to be a part of making it better, what's a word of advice that you can give them?
We have the power to directly influence our MPs. Their contact details are often on their websites. If you feel passionately about something, first thing I would say is research it. Really get tight with your argument. People will want to pick major holes in people's arguments because it's the quickest way to shut them down. And then when you feel confident and resolute in the facts, a practical step that you can do is you can write to your MP. And people seem to think, writing to your MP doesn't do something. But I think MPs are surprised at the moment with the amount of communication that they've got in the last few weeks. I think that a lot of them are used to not having young people or people of a certain mindset get in touch with them. I think that's a practical step. I think a really important step after, really researching and understanding the things that you're passionate about is to really, dig deep and understand that there might be people that you know really well that you agree with on everything that don't agree with you on this. And that sometimes, it's not about it's not a boxing match. Someone's not going to get knocked out, and someone's going to be the one standing as the champion. It's, that level and that intricacy of discourse should be what leads, for, justice and equality to preside. And I think, the third thing that I think is just to remember that, these people aren't your teachers, they're not your boss. They're your democratic representatives. And when, people sometimes have issues with authority figures telling them no or taking away their power. And it's a very different situation. You are born into a society that allows you to get angry about those things, feel empowered by the fact that the world that you live in gives you that opportunity. These people aren't dictators. These people aren't setting impenetrable boundaries. They are people that you have the power to vote for. And 45 to 60% turnout around the country means that 40% of people could be enough to radically change the whole face of politics in this country. And so fundamentally as well, if you want to get involved and you're not registered to vote, unless you have a fundamental belief system that stops you from doing that, get registered. Get registered and turn up for your local council elections, because still to this point, there are people getting into power on 10, 15 votes. That means that you and your mates could be enough to influence the whole next few years of your, local environment. So to keep positive, to understand your position, to learn your facts, and if you still feel, that you want to keep fighting, build up the people around you, and most importantly, register and get involved in the democratic system that makes those decisions. And that simplest way to do that is to vote.
Excellent. Thanks for your time today, Sam. You're an inspiration. Twitter details will be on this video here. And yeah, stay tuned. Cheers.